before, feel free to take advantage of the chat function and to send questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to address them during the question and answer portion of the meeting. I'd now like to take attendance of board members present so we can make sure we have a quorum to proceed. I'll call the names of the board members. If you would please let me know if you are here. Felisa Carter.
Present.
Andrew Foyce. Emily Gunston.
Present.
Antonio Nunez.
Present.
Katia Semyonova. I see Katia. We'll come back to her. Lana Suttenberg.
Present.
And Reverend Whitaker.
Present.
And I see Katia Semyonova on, but I haven't heard her respond yet.
Sorry, I'm here.
Thanks so much.
I'm with a little emergency, sorry.
Understood. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have a quorum. We can proceed. So today we're doing old business. Really, it's the review of the internal procedures for the Clemency Board. This will start a discussion about those procedures. They were received, I believe the operating guidelines were sent to the board yesterday. Christina is going to walk us through those, and we'll take any questions from the board members and the public. I think that some of this may require that we do a subcommittee kind of work group to go through and do a line by line review of these. But I'd like Christina to do her introduction first, and then we can see where we want to go at that point. Okay, with that, Christina.
Good morning, everyone. So I just want to confirm that everyone has received the operating guidelines that were sent out yesterday. If you haven't, please send me an email and I'll make sure to send a copy to you. We're not going to comb through it certainly today in detail because we want to give all the board members an opportunity to review and send back their edits and concerns. But I certainly want to just highlight a couple of pockets of areas that I think would be beneficial to gather a group of board members and committee to address and flush out a little bit more, partly because I think it would be imperative to have your criminal and procedural expertise in these areas to flush these issues out more. So I will share my screen, but what I'll be sharing is just the comments that I've highlighted in the operating guidelines that I want to flag for your attention as issues that need to be delved into in greater detail in committee. Okay, I will share my screen. Let me know if you're able to see it. Can you all see this? Okay, great.
I can see it. Are you able to make it a little larger?
I am. Does that suffice?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, great. Okay, so just a quick overview of what it entails is it breaks down what the Clemency Board is, important documents involved, essentially what our goal was with the operating guideline was to create a one-stop shop for a place where you can go to kind of see all the rules and regulations that involve the Clemency Board, which includes a compilation of the DC code that's established the Clemency Board and the regulations in one place, as well as the Open Meetings Act. So we're most of our meetings, because we are an open government, are controlled by the Open Meetings Act. So all those rules that affect us, tried to put it all in this sort of a standard operating procedure for the board. So that's what that entails. Then it goes into board meetings, notice agendas, public statements, voting, the procedures for open meetings and procedures for closed meetings, the idea of reviewing applications. So I step-by-step review process of how applications are done, and timeline goals, application statuses, the definition of those which we've gone through that are in the regulations, and evaluations of applications, application approvals, so such as notices, hearings if needed, and then publication of application statistics. That's the report that the board would prepare on a yearly basis about applications received and so forth, as per the regulations. And then just some other topics that also affect us, and created sort of an appendix of documents that I think need fleshing out, which is sort of a worksheet that will be done every time an applications come in to check for, does this application fit within the eligibility guidelines of the DC code? Is it complete? Is there any information that's missing that we need to follow up on? And then Appendix B, which are factors for evaluating applications. I kind of listed, based on what's on the DC code and the regulations, factors that I think are worth considering, but that's totally up to the board how that evaluation process will go. So these two areas, I think, are areas that will certainly delve deeper, but I'll just show you where I flagged that as you begin your review. You'll see comments, but I'll take them in order of their receipt. So here, as you can see, I've highlighted that this is the review of application, the overview process. So I've done a step-by-step breakdown of it. Refer to eligibility and completeness worksheet, Appendix A, which is at the bottom of this application. And it's sort of a great way to kind of like sift applications as they come in, make sure we have all the information we need. But I think this is something I think the board should review in committee and then bring it up to a public meeting with edits to this to address any other concerns. So would certainly want board members' assistance with addressing this in public committee. And then here, one thing I wanted to flag was when we get all the releases of information, we have learned from the Superior Court that in particular transcripts, access to transcripts, which will be a as-need basis, partly because not all cases have transcripts. And so in order for us to have access to transcripts, we might actually have to get them produced by the court reporter's office, and that may entail a cost. So I think that's something that we should certainly flesh out as well in committee about when will the board decide it needs transcripts. There are two situations here. In cases where there are transcripts on file with the court, there's a copy cost involved. And in cases where there are no transcripts involved, we have to order those. And then we need to figure out the logistics of, where does this cost fall on the applicant? Is this a cost that the board is looking to cover? These are all questions I think the committee should delve deeper and bring up to the board for consideration. And lastly, in step 4, Appendix B, these are the factors that I was referring to that the board would like to consider when evaluating applications. That's also another thing I would appreciate board members in committee to consider. And that's the same thing, Appendix B. And one of the things that has recently come up, we've been getting some questions that have come through the Clemency Board's email, is that what do we do for individuals who are in sort of a witness protection program? I'm not very familiar with the witness protection program, but what name would they use and so forth? And certainly we'd want them to utilize their protected name on applications, but I think protection of confidentiality is something that the board should also discuss in committee and institute procedures that can ensure for those. But in particular here, this was another issue of confidentiality that came up, and that was sending back a copy once we issue a letter of recommendation. How do we send a copy of that letter of recommendation and supporting documentation back to the applicant so they can utilize it possibly for a DOJ application or for their own records and still, protect it, because a lot of that will involve disclosing some, personal protected information. So those procedures, I think, are something we might have to consider, or maybe the applicant comes and picks it up from us and we can ensure that. But for those who are in BOP custody, how do we protect that information if they don't have an attorney? Do we ask for a family member to pick it up from us? I think those are factors we should consider, partly because, from my understanding, individuals in BOP custody have their mail opened. So those two issues of confidentiality are things I think the board needs to delve deeper into. And with respect to cases of actual innocence, one of the things that we consistently said is that we certainly, we're required by the DC code to consider cases of actual innocence. But I added this modifier here because the board is certainly not in a position, and it's beyond the board's capacity to make determinations of actual innocence. So we certainly want to figure out our procedures when we're dealing with cases of actual innocence. What are we looking for? And those can go into the evaluating factors in Appendix B. So another issue to address in committee. And one of the things that we certainly recommend with respect to confidentiality is requesting that board members and also any other individuals who will help with the evaluation of applications to sign sort of a non-disclosure agreement, just for protection of the sensitive information we'll be evaluating. And then here is where I believe we'll also need fleshing out. So this is Appendix A, which goes into the evaluating whether an applicant is eligible to even apply with the Clemency Board, and whether or not they're eligible. Question 2, one of the things that is required is that an applicant has, for lack of a better word, exhausted all of their judicial remedies and relief. And we went ahead and, created examples of that under, a motion for compassionate relief and a IRA and challenges to conviction. But I think facially, we need to consider when we receive an application, how do we know what the time limits for something being lapsed? So if you have X amount of time to file an appeal on this case, how do we determine whether or not they still have the ability to file that appeal? Has that time lapsed? And so forth. So identifying those instances where we can look at it at an application and say, okay, yes, they're past their time to file an appeal. They're past their time to file a motion for compassionate release. Fleshing those issues out are certainly something we need to do when developing this worksheet. So with that, I will turn it over to board members for questions, but certainly would want to give you all time to review each section of this guideline and raise questions and edits when you have an opportunity.
This is Ilana. First of all, thank you, Christina, for preparing this. This is pretty comprehensive, and I have not had a chance to fully review it, so going with that caveat. But I have a two-part question. The first one is, do we know the status of the board member with background in victims' rights? And the reason that I'm asking that is I think that, these operating guidelines, I know we've kind of been deferring the question for quite some time about how victims will be involved in this process. And I did see one reference that I think that, in hearings, reference that word, but I think that now might be the time that we need to start thinking about that and how we're going to engage with victims. So it's really a two-part question as to the guidelines and also a board member who can be part of that discussion.
I have not heard anything as of yet, but certainly something that I think the board can raise with the Mayor's Office of Talent and Appointment, because we, that is not within our wheelhouse to decide. It's definitely MODA's decisioning. So not entirely sure if anyone has applied for the position and so forth, but certainly something that I think the board could reach out to MODA and ask.
And in terms of the guidelines, do we think that this is the place where we kind of start talking about how outreach is happening and what that outreach will look like? Who will be doing it? Will this be a letter that we send? What if they've, it's 20 years ago, in our experience, it's very difficult to find people. If you find people, it's, some people have a hard time talking about it if it's a more violent crime. But also it's hard to find people, just practically speaking. And we spend a lot of resources looking for people and or their families if it was a non-surviving victim. So I just wanted us to kind of start thinking about both more, kind of theoretically how this would work and also practically, like how this would happen.
So Ilana, sorry, I must have missed that. Outreach in what context?
Just
getting
locating
the word
things.
out. Oh,
No, sorry. Like a case comes in, there's been a petition filed. How does outreach happen to the victim to let them know? So practically, do we send a letter? Who sends a letter? Is there a phone call? Is there an opportunity to talk about it with someone? Just what does it look like? But then also, what if there's no good address, no good phone number? Kind of how, practically speaking, does follow-up work, and who is going to be doing that and how? Which is a big question, I know. I think it's something that we need to think about.
No, that is a good point, and certainly when you do get an opportunity to review the guidelines in detail, if you see an opportunity where you think that would fit in the process, that this should come earlier or later, or who, please certainly make those suggestions. But I'll definitely make a note out of it and see where we can include that in the process.
Thank you for that, Elena. Are there other questions that the board would like to ask at this point? Right, I'm wondering if people really need time to digest, read this and digest it and start to work it through. So if there are no immediate questions right now, I heard you ask Christina specifically for there to be some working group that would start to review it. And you said criteria for who you thought would be definitely needed on that group. Can you tell us that again?
Sure. Really, certainly would just love any board member who has, clemency, criminal experience, but anyone will do based on your availability. But we really, I think most of the questions deal with like procedural criminal issues as well. Just understanding that when cases lapse, when appeals are ripe, when they're not ripe. And so that would be great to kind of just have an initial working group that can flesh those issues out and then bring it up to the whole board.
I'm happy to join, Christina.
Thank you, Ilana.
I'm also happy to join. This is Emily, but my criminal experience is not local. And so it might be helpful to actually also have somebody from PDS or West Criminal Defense.
I can do that as well.
Okay. Thank you both.
Great. Are there other board members who are interested in participating? Okay. I'm happy to jump in and help as I can as a non-lawyer.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, I will reach out to all of you to set up a time as a committee working group. But I do ask that all board members also send me any edits in their review of the guidelines.
Christine, if I'm not mistaken, you had also mentioned that some desire around the outreach committee. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I think as we indicated, outreach, going back to a portion of Ilana's question, it's outreach about what the board is and what it does, and that we are receiving applications, but also outreach to a section of the outreach committee is also reaching out to parties that are involved in certain applications. So I have a list of individuals who are in the outreach committee, and I'm willing to schedule a meeting for that. But I think priority goes to the guidelines first before furthering outreach. So I think we should hold on that if that's okay with the board.
Yeah, I think that's wise. Let's get the administrative stuff squared away and then go full throttle on outreach. Okay.
We have a few public members, so if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those questions as well. And I think we have Professor Moyd as our sole public member. Professor Moyd, do you have any questions?
Morning, everyone. I don't have a question, just a comment. Going back to Ilana's question, you might want to look at, as you're developing the steps that you would want to take regarding reaching out to victims, you might want to look at some of the procedures that are used by the different parole boards, the parole commissions, procedures outline the steps that their victim witness unit takes. And I know the Maryland Parole Board does the same thing. So you might want to just take a look at that instead of reinventing the wheel.
Linda, are you able to share that with me?
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you. I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Moyd. That's actually a great idea.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay. Any other questions for Christina on this matter? Okay. I was hoping maybe we could get this working group up and going and then have a substantive conversation on the actual content of the guidelines. Is it possible that we could meet just a few weeks from now? I'm thinking maybe May 6th, Friday, May 6th. And is that sufficient time for this working group to convene and get some things going? Gives us a month.
I think so, Patrick, and that works for me. This is Emily.
Great.
I think that timeline works. I'm just checking the date. The timeline I think is fine. By May 6th is plenty of time. And May 6th is a good day for me.
Okay.
Can we do the morning of May 6th? That would work for me.
Yep.
Great.
Anybody not able to join on May 6th who's a board member? Okay. Hearing none. Why don't we say May 6th, 10 a.m.? Does that work?
Can I just ask one thing that I possibly receive edits from board members at least a week before May 6th so I can consolidate them into one document for consideration?
So by noon on Friday, April 29th, you would like to get feedback from the board?
Yes, please.
Sure. You prefer that in writing, just right back to you by email?
That would be great. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Anything else under old business?
None on my end as of yet, no.
Okay, great. So does any board member want to bring up new business? Any new business? Hearing none.
So sorry. One more question. The morning of May 6th, did we set up a time? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yes, 10 a.m.
From what I recall, we moved our board meetings to the afternoon because of schedule conflicts, like recurring meetings with various board members. I want to make sure that that's still not existing before we settle on 10 a.m.
Yeah, I've asked folks to just consent that, and most people have said the morning's fine. And then I asked for anybody who can't do it, and no one answered. So I think we're probably fine for May 6th at 10.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So any new business? Last call, new business. All right. And then our regular agenda says public comments. Are there any public comments? I don't think there can be. Any public comments? Okay. So with that is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Second, Pat.
Second. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to seeing you on May 6th and to do some work with the working group between now and then. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.